This
branch.
conference will now be recorded.
I thank you for tuning in to what we believe will be a most interesting webinar addressing from an international, European, national and leading global operator perspective the critical issue tackling piracy. We are truly honoured to have with us this evening amazing speakers. As such, I kindly ask each of you to please ensure, except for the speakers, that your microphones and cameras are switched off to warrant clarity of our esteemed speakers during their presentations. Please also note that we are recording this webinar and we shall share it with those who participate. From my side, in a world of total disruption, a pandemic, critical issues affecting the maritime industry, from rolling out of technological efficiencies, blockchains, greenhouse gas emission reductions, automation, sustainability, cyber threats, safety, stamping out of corruption, and economic crisis, we are experiencing a heightened critical situation from an age-old issue that affects sovereigns, empires, and states over centuries. Piracy attacks and incidents. Fueled by the pandemic and economic downturn, warning signs were evident and voices raised since the end of spring 2020 in Asia, West Africa, and the Americas. According to International Maritime Bureau Piracy Reporting Center, 2020 was a bad year. The global number of sea piracy incidents rose by over 20% from 2019, and West Africa experienced the highest number of attacks and attempted attacks since data collection began in the early 90s. History has seen periods of specific spikes in maritime piracy. The Asian financial crisis in 97-98, with pirate attacks jumping by 80% and by another 50% from 99 to 2000 and in the subsequent 5 years. The number of incidents actually reported quadrupled. 2008, Somali pirates dramatically escalated their seizure of commercial vessels. Alas, the economic costs of the pandemic are particularly challenging for many piracy-prone countries. The IMB is not the only organization to see an increase in maritime crime in 2020. Other piracy reporting centers also saw increases. The IMO and RICAP, the Regional Cooperation Agreement on Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery Against Ships in Asia, both registered sharp jumps in attacks in 2020. The US Office of Naval Intelligence, through its anti-ship activity messaging system, recorded 264 incidents in 2020, a whopping increase of over 70% from 2019. Each of these organizations showing striking surges in piracy incidents. I ask if you have any questions during these presentations. At the top right corner of your screens, there is a comment icon. Please write them and we will address them to the speakers. And on mentioning speakers, allow me to introduce these experts who will each have 10 to 15 minutes. And their profiles can be seen on your screens. I'm introducing first the Deputy Minister of Shipping to the President of the Republic of Cyprus, Mr. Vassilios Demetriades. Welcome, Mr. Deputy Minister. Mr. Minister will address the Cyprus position, possibly some statistics relating to Cyprus-flagged vessels and Cyprus's stand in encouraging owners-operators to report suspicious activity or incidents. John Stawpert, Management, Environment and Trade at the International Chamber of Shipping. Welcome, John, and thank you again for joining us. In a press release, ICS stated, and I quote, "Gulf of Guinea piracy continues to threaten seafarers. Industry wants action now." John, I would like you to be the first presenter after my introduction and answer the question, would you like to expand on the statement and what global actions do need to be taken? Martin Dorsman, Secretary General of the European Committee Shipowners Association. Martin, welcome, and again, thank you also to you for your valuable time. Martin will be presenting on the EU's actions and ECSA's views, the launch of the new security concept in the Gulf of Guinea, coordinated maritime presence. And third speaker will be Mr. Prabhat, Group Managing Director and CEO of MS Shipmanagement Limited Cyprus, a leading global operator having been attacked by pirates. MSC Mandi, 6 crew members were reported as being kidnapped. Mr. Prabhat, thank you so much for joining us. And my question addressing to you is, please share your views as a global operator of what actions should be taken. So, without further ado, I kindly ask John to answer my question from a global perspective of ICS. John, the screen is yours and we're listening to you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Just to introduce myself, and hopefully my slides will appear shortly. My name is John Stawpert. I'm the Manager for Environment and Trade at the International Chamber of Shipping. For those of you who don't know who we are, and I would hope that most of you do, we are the principal international trade association for ship owners and ship operators. We represent around 80% of the world's fleet. We have member associations all around the world, and we will deal with any and all issues that affect shipping and the free flow of trade. But my task today is to talk about piracy, and in the next 10 minutes I hope to give a whistle-stop tour of the phenomenon of piracy and where we're seeing it most at the moment, and how we see, in answer to Yvonne's question, that problem being resolved in the longer term through global cooperation. Next slide, please. So this is the definition of piracy under UNCLOS Article 101. The reason I've put this up is that you will find me referring to piracy and armed robbery, and this is the reason for that distinction. As far as international law is concerned, piracy is something that takes place on the high seas. Armed robbery is something that occurs within a state's territorial waters. It's a legal distinction, and in reality, it doesn't make very much difference either to the criminals who will use the same modus operandi wherever they're operating. The 12 nautical mile line means nothing to them, but more significantly, it's not a distinction that is recognised by the seafarer, because the consequences for them of being attacked by pirates are the same whether they're in international waters or whether they're in territorial waters. But that's the reason that you may hear me throw in the word armed robbery along with piracy. Next slide, please. In terms of scope, and certainly in the 20 years I've been dealing with the phenomenon of piracy, we notice that it springs up in certain hotspots from time to time with varying degrees of severity. The original piracy hotspot was Southeast Asia, where there were lots of armed attacks against ships, usually with the purpose of stealing money or fittings from the ship. Those came to a close after regional cooperation was agreed between the littoral states in that region. And although we do occasionally see flare-ups, by and large it's under control. And that was the first example of how international cooperation could help eradicate a problem that transcended borders and national controls. The one area that most people will be familiar with in terms of piracy is Somalia, and I'll discuss that at greater length in a moment. But that was the game-changing event so far as the piracy issue is concerned, because it was a problem that at times we did not think had a solution and required the commitment of the global commons to resolve it. The area where we see the problem most profoundly now is the Gulf of Guinea, and again I'll discuss that at some length later in my slides. And finally, one area to watch is the Gulf of Mexico. Around 18 months ago there were a spate of attacks against offshore units in this region, some of which were quite sizable in their ambition. On one occasion we saw the pirates steal an entire helipad from an offshore rig. This seems to be under control thanks to naval deployments by Mexico, but it is an area that is on our watch list because there is the potential for instability in this region and for unscrupulous criminals to exploit that and attack maritime commercial assets. Next slide, please. So as I said, Somalia was the game-changing event. We saw a surge from what you could reasonably define as normal Somali piracy, that is attacking ships to steal spares, supplies, money, occasionally to kidnap crew members. That changed in 2000 and 2008. We found that the pirates in Somalia were becoming bolder. Their range, as you can see from this map, was extending considerably, and their modus operandi were changing. They went from being what we would say is normal piracy to kidnapping the crew and hijacking the ship and taking it back to shore. At the height of the crisis, 3,000 plus seafarers were captive in Somalia in horrific conditions. This was enabled by the fact that Somalia was a failed state. There was no rule of law. There was no control of Somali waters at all. And the kingpins who financed this crime were often well-established members of their local communities ashore, with total impunity from what little law enforcement there was. Our first response to this crisis was to declare a high-risk area, and that expanded across the ocean as we saw piracy proliferate from bases on the Somali coastline. And at the height of the crisis, it was difficult to see how we would resolve this in the longer term. There was talk amongst a lot of us that this was actually a cancer and it was something that we would have to live with and manage over the longer period of time. Next slide, please. But as it turned out, we were able to tackle it. And this comes to Yvonne's question of how the global commons can come together and how we cooperate to address a security issue that affects us all in one way or another. In the case of Somalia, we saw significant military deployments with a counter-piracy mandate. The EU's Op Atalanta, CMF, committed resources to counter-piracy. NATO also had an operation. And independent states sent their grey ships down to those waters to secure them for the simple reason that they were strategically in their interests. We as the industry developed the best management practices in cooperation with those military deployers to ensure that our ships were sufficiently prepared and protected against the threat of piracy when they went through those waters. And it remains the case today that compliance with BMP is the best way to safeguard the security of your ship in that region. The other phenomenon that we saw that did have an impact was the use of armed guards. Now, ICS takes the view that armed guards should always be the last resort and not the first for the most vulnerable shipping that cannot protect itself by any other means. You'll see an awful lot about the dip in piracy in 2011 being entirely due to the presence of armed guards on board ships. Personally, I don't think that's necessarily entirely true. 2011 also saw a ramping up of military action, and in particular activity in the Somali littoral waters that prevented the Somali pirates being able to supply their skiffs from the land side. But armed guards have undoubtedly had an impact, and unlike perhaps their counterparts on the other side of the continent, Somali pirates really did not have the appetite to endure a firefight. There was also the diplomatic response and capacity building ashore. This has met with mixed results, but what we can say is the attention that the shipping industry initially generated in the diplomatic community played a significant role in ensuring that the military operations endured, that the problem continued to be recognised, and that resources were committed to its resolution in the longer term. And we are seeing that still with the continuation of Operation Atalanta, which we believe is essential for the safety and security of the trade lanes in this part of the world. So that is one example of how the global community could come together to tackle a piracy crisis. Next slide, please. The Gulf of Guinea is currently the area where we have the most problems. And what you can see from this map is the spread of incidents in the region. This is a snapshot for the dry period at the end of last year. And you can see from those dots that actually compared to the Western Indian Ocean, it's not as huge a scope. Don't be fooled into thinking that that doesn't mean it's any less severe than the crisis we saw on the other side of the continent. Next slide, please. In terms of piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, what we see is the pirates are capable of greater violence. They are more heavily armed than pirates elsewhere. They have a greater determination to see out attacks and firefights, and they have a greater willingness to sustain casualties in doing so. Their modus operandi now is kidnapping. Previously, we saw a spate of cargo thefts of oil products, but now they solely concentrate on kidnapping crew members, and increasingly we're finding in significant numbers. The environment in which this takes place is more complex. Legally, there is the rule of law ashore that limits the willingness of outside states to respond to the problem of piracy in the region. And these are some of the issues we've faced as we've tried to raise this as a key security issue for the industry to the international community. The legal obstacles of deploying to the region will often see states being reticent to send grey hulls down there. There is essentially a lack of will on the part of a lot of states to engage with the problem, either because it's not in their strategic interests or their strategic focus in the region is elsewhere, and they don't want to jeopardize that through committing to a problem that they don't see affecting them. There have been to date very limited law enforcement resources, which has created an environment in which pirates can operate with impunity. And we have seen a significant lack of coordination between states in the region in responding to incidents. All of these have allowed a permissive environment to thrive in which the pirates can operate. Next slide, please. But the good news is we are seeing solutions come together, and this is essentially a real-time update. A lot of the things on this are coming online virtually as we speak. Nigerian engagement with the problem has increased significantly. Previously, they wouldn't even admit there was a problem with piracy. Now they're actively trying to solve it. We meet with them on a monthly basis in the Nigeria Industry Working Group to seek out solutions and to help them have an impact on protecting the trade that they need from maritime. The Deep Blue project is a commitment of significant assets in Nigeria's waters. These are now coming online this month, and we are seeing the first patrols by those boats off Nigeria, and we hope they will have a significant impact in deterring and interdicting the pirates. We've also seen naval operations and exercises by Nigeria, which we hope will proliferate and provide greater coverage yet further out. There have been cross-border operations between states in the region. There have been cross-border responses to live incidents. Again, this is the sort of activity we want to see proliferate. We want to see opposed boardings and pirates captured. There is something called the SPOMO Act in Nigeria. This is providing legal finish, and whilst it's not perfect, it does at least give us the assurance that where pirates are captured, they will be prosecuted. And as we did on the other side of the continent, industry has developed best management practices. I would urge that anybody who has ships in that region or seafarers that are going into that region ensure they're aware of those and that they are in place on board their ships. Because what we are seeing at the moment is if you apply them properly, it gives you a much, much greater chance of surviving a piracy incident. There is an increasing international focus. The reticence to engage with the problem appears to be dissipating, and we're seeing European ships, European naval vessels in particular, deploying to the region. And finally, what could be a game changer, Shade Gulf of Guinea is going to be established. That's a shared awareness and deconfliction meeting where all states and operators with an interest in securing these waters will get together at a strategic level and provide solutions, hopefully for the longer term. Last slide. So, can we eradicate piracy? It's my belief that at the very least, we can control it to the point where it's an irritant rather than a threat. To do this, we need dedicated counter-piracy operations, both regionally and drawing on international assets. We need effective reporting and response mechanisms, and again, we're seeing those come online through the efforts of MDAT-GOG and Nigeria in particular. We need cooperation and deconfliction, where there are essentially competing military operations, and we need a legal finish, and that's not just on a state basis, that's for any vessel down there that might find itself capturing pirates, and the lessons we learned in the Indian Ocean need to be applied in these waters. But it's my firm belief that the problem in the Gulf of Guinea can be solved for the longer term, for the benefit of the states in that region and for the benefits of industry and the global commons, and that what we're seeing now indicates that the time is ripe to do so. Thank you very much. That's my presentation.
John, thank you very, very much indeed for sharing this info. I would like the audience to write any comments or questions they have in the comment icon. But moving forward, Martin Dorsman, if you don't mind sharing your insights, views, and especially representing ECSA and what the EU is actually saying.
Thank you, Yvonne. My presentation will be up in a second, I presume. Let me introduce myself quickly as Secretary General of the European Community Shipowners Associations. I'm in this position for 3.5 years now, and before I took up this position, I was the Managing Director of the Dutch Shipowners Association, working in the shipping industry for some 20 years, and a lot of experience with the situation in Somalia, the piracy there, and also having experience with a Dutch ship owner that has a vessel and his crew kidnapped in the Gulf of Guinea. So, and that there are, I think, important lessons what we can learn from the situation in Somalia and how to apply these also in the Gulf of Guinea. So, can I have the next slide, please? Very quickly about ECSA. We are an association of associations. We represent 20 national ship owners associations in the EU, Norway and the UK. We represent all shipping trades and segments. European ship owners, of course, operate globally. What is it? What we do? We try, of course, to promote and protect the interests of our members and European shipping. We are based in Brussels, and if I talk about European shipping, what exactly do we represent? European ship owners control some 40% of the world fleet. We are responsible for 2 million jobs, and we add some 150 billion euros to the European economy. So that's what the interest of European shipping is. Of course, we coordinate very closely with ICS on this topic, because this is a topic that affects the global shipping industry. But as ECSA, we talk to the European institutions, and we have the dialogue with them on the way how Europe can contribute to solve this very urgent problem. Tomorrow we have a meeting with the Commissioner for Transport, Ms. Valian, and this is one of the topics on our agenda. So it's really a top priority also for ECSA. Can I have the next slide, please? Some figures about how it developed in the Gulf of Guinea. You see, compared to a couple of years ago, it tripled more or less. You see very clearly Nigeria, but also other countries. That was also on the graph that John showed. It's an unacceptable risk. I don't have to explain it. The impact is huge. I experienced it very closely when we had that situation with the Dutch ship owner. Lives being lost. Of course, there's an economic impact on trade and development, and it's certainly not developing in the right direction. If I look back at Somalia, and one of the important lessons learned there, and John referred to it, I think it's very, very important that there is a very close coordination and cooperation between the shipping industry and the governments, the naval assets being deployed. It's all about sharing information. It's all about that there can be a quick response by the naval assets to any situations developing. I think that's a crucial element. So I'm very pleased to say that we have a very good cooperation with the European institutions, especially with the European External Action Services. And the next slide will show what they are doing. EU has taken action. It's the new concept that was launched in January. It's the Coordinated Maritime Presence concept. You can see on the slide what the aim is. It's all about coordinating resources of European member states in the region and to share information. I just explained how important that is. So far, we have seen a couple of EU member states that are concretely supporting the implementation with at least some naval assets. I think more can be done. That's why that's also in the heading. We are urging other member states via our members to also support to this efforts. And it's a new concept for the EU, and it's not an official EU operation. And I think that's the big difference with the EU operation Atalanta that was there in the waters for the coast of Somalia. And that's why we are investigating and also talking to the EEAS what this new concept will be, how will it operate in practice. Because what we need is very clear commanding structures. We need to know who's in charge of coordination. If a vessel is to report a suspicious situation, who to report to, what will be done with that information, how will that be shared with other vessels in the region. So it's a new concept and it needs to be explored. How does it work in practice? But we are very pleased with this initiative of the EU. And for some years already, the EU is also supporting in another way the measures taken to address this situation. So capacity building in the region, it's also a very important element of the package of measures we need as shipping industry. Can I have the next slide, please? So we are positive, and what I explained, that EU Operation Atalanta showed that EU can be a leader in maritime security. It was a very effective operation. I can remember from the start when the Dutch Navy sent assets there that it was a learning curve. So it was happily a steep learning curve, and I think that we can use the experiences that were there, that also for the situation in the Gulf of Guinea. So it's a very good first step. But we need more naval assets there, and it must be part of a larger solution to solving the threat. And of course, as was the case in Somalia, we also need non-EU member states to come in with naval assets and to address the situation. It's not a silver bullet. What John already explained, it's we need to look at the root causes, longer term development, the same situation as in Somalia. The root causes on land must be addressed, and what John also said, ship owners should indeed follow very closely the best management practices. But we need to, what I explained, we need to work together with the naval assets to share information, and that's, I think, the best way to proceed. So thank you very much for your attention.
Martin, thank you very much for sharing this information. Interesting to note that best management practices should be followed, and I'm sure that as a global leading operator, MSC is following best global management practice regarding its vessels. And I would like, on that note, Mr. Prabhat, as I mentioned, he is the Group Managing Director and CEO of MSC Shipmanagement Limited Cyprus, to address that question. Mr. Prabhat.
Thank you, everyone. And good evening to everyone, and good evening to our shipping minister and the guests from the ECSA and the ICS. I think this is, like everybody says, that it is the time that we need to really address the situation and try to move with the momentum that has been built after years of the discussion around the table to eradicate this piracy. And we have a large number of vessels operating in the West Africa all the time, and we have been advocating a long time for a lot of strict countermeasures that can be used to tackle the piracy, because we have also experienced some of them ourselves. Can we have the next slide? So in the past 3 years, we have our own vessels. So we had 7 attacks. We had 4 attempted boardings. There have been 3 successful boarding, out of which in one case, the crew had locked up in Citadel and the pirates had given up a chase because we could get the external help. But in 2 cases, we had the crew kidnapped, one in 2019 and one in 2020. And next to it is a map. This is about 2 hours ago, just showing different positions of our vessels. So we have today, 2 hours ago, we had about 20 vessels in the Gulf of Guinea. And in a monthly basis, we have more than 300 transits through the area, actually. So, it is very, very important for us that the strict piracy countermeasures are applied and we follow. And of course, we advocate for the BMP West Africa that has been made. It is a very good tool in order to harden the ships, deter the pirates, and of course report it. But we also have employed some additional measures, because it's good to share a bit of experience from this attempted boarding. Most of these boardings are happening after the sunset, obviously, but they're actually happening in the early hours of the morning, when probably the crew is least alert and everything else. And what we have seen it in the cases that we have analyzed for these attempted boardings is there is usually a mothership standstill, dead, with no lights, and there is a high-speed boat. And these are actually fiberglass boats, which can, it's a long, having a less friction, with big Yamaha engines, and they can do 20, 22 knot speed in a very fast time. And they don't have a big range. They can go probably a mile or two maximum. But the big difference between the Somalia pirates and the Gulf of Guinea pirates is that today these pirates in the Gulf of Guinea are much courageous and braver than the Somalian pirates. They are willing to engage in the armed attacks. I mean, we have seen the case where last year in one of the places, the 4 naval officers were killed by the pirates. They are quite determined, and they are very, very physically fit. This is the feedback that we have received from our crew member who really experienced them. In addition to the BMP-5 that we follow, we also have around the clock, we are calling our ships which are in the West Africa every 2 hours, just to be 100% sure that there is no lost communications and the crew is full alert. We have also started additionally a weekly drill that we do in the morning, and we have brought down by the drills evacuation to Citadel to almost about 3 minutes, because once the pirates board, there is no other way to delay the kidnapping unless you move to Citadel. And this notion is also a bit under attack after the last incident of the Mozart, where the pirates could gain access to the Citadel. So this is a bit of worrying trend, because all these incidents make the pirates bold, and they are willing to go extra mile to make this attack even much more better. We have also gone a bit a step higher in Citadel. We have, of course, all the communication facilities, but we also have the full repeater of the ECDIS, so that in case we have to send a help, we know exactly where the ship has been. And lately we have seen, and we have been alerted that in the last case that we had, there was one member of the pirate gang who knew exactly how to use the ship system. So in the second case, when the pirates had boarded, all the crew had evacuated to Citadel except for the 2 watchkeepers. They were on the bridge. So they could make the public announcement and get the crew out that I am your chief officer calling, and the pirates have gone away, and you are, you can come back to this your cabins actually. So they are becoming smarter and smarter, which is a bit of worrying trend. So we have to really deal with this faster. Can we move to the next slide? Next slide, please. Yeah. So besides all these operational measures and the security measures that we are taking on over the ship, so there are also some options available today that is being used to the best possible extent, like the Nigerian coastal water and the ports. The Nigerian Navy is providing a service, whether it is a good or bad, but at least they're providing a service, making the people feel more safe. The Lagos anchorage, Lome anchorage, and the Cotonou anchorage, there are armed navy which can actually, they're providing the guard to the ships actually, which is good. So we can see there is some positive development in the coastal states, but what is lacking today is that there is no collaboration among themselves, so that there is no united response. All the responses are fragmented, and unless we bring all these coastal states and the EU and any other international body that can come and support a well-coordinated approach, we will not get the desired results. Next slide, please. EU naval forces, they have a few assets always, but the number of the assets are much less than what is required. We have had good collaboration with the Italian Navy and the Portugal Navy, who had their assets, and we have conducted few security drills, because this gives a bit of confidence to everybody in the area that if there is an attack, some helicopters can come in 45 minutes, somebody can come in 30 minutes. But this is something we would like to see more naval assets. And hopefully with this coordinated response that has been approved by European Union, there will be a faster follow-up and implementation, and more people can join. Because this will be really the key to generate the confidence among the seafarer, because we are talking about the seafarers who are going to earn the money for a living, and we don't want them to become a victim of a crisis which is not from the sea. What we're seeing at the sea is a symptom. The cause is lying, as our previous colleagues have said, that it is lying ashore. It is lying because the countries have been not able to provide the food or the basic essentials to their population, or maybe they had for example, the fishing and farming in the Niger Delta, which used to be the livelihood, that has gone away. So people have no other means but to come back to the piracy to keep themselves survived, actually. Next slide, please. So if we compare the Gulf of Guinea piracy with the Somalia, actually the area is much smaller. Next slide, please. As you can see that it is quite a concentrated area, and so compared to the Somalia, it should be a quite solvable situation, but it is not today. If we take in Nigeria itself, based on the last data, there are about 184 security patrol crafts having a license, and all are being operated by the Nigerian Navy. We are talking about pirate gangs, maybe about 10 gangs, 15 gangs. So with the hardware that is available today, still it should have been quite easy to control. But what is lacking is the coordination, and what is really quite a welcome step is by Nigeria about the Deep Blue project, is that they have accepted that there is something wrong that is happening that Nigeria has to address, because Nigeria is really the key player here. Not only that, they have also admitted that they have the criminals within the government ranks, and this is something they have to remove. Then only the real action can take place. So this is something that Nigeria is the one that is the key to solving this problem. And I believe that the industry, till now, have been itself not united, because we are talking of the oil companies. They had a different interest. They have a different dynamics. They wanted to be always on the good side of these governments. So for them, they didn't get much affected by the piracy, because they are coming into say Nigeria, and they are taking the oil and hitting straight back, which is a much different than the container vessels, because we have to serve all the coastal states. So we are in the area much longer and exposed to the risk much longer. Our seafarers are exposed to the risk much longer than the oil companies and all. But I believe that people are coming around. So ship's operational measure, passage planning, everything is going to help. Ship security measure following the BMP West Africa is going to help. But by the time there is a well-coordinated action by the European naval forces and all the governments, I believe that we need all the lobby to have also the private armed guards on board the ships, because till the time it happens, only private armed guards can provide the sense of security and the confidence that is really required in order to have the seafarers keep working on the ships trading in the West Africa without fear. Thank you. That was my last slide.
Thank you, Mr. Karani. Very much appreciated, and indeed it is a very sad situation that seafarers are exposed to these piracy incidents and attacks and kidnappings. Moving forward again, I would like our Deputy Minister of Shipping to the President, Mr. Vassilios Demetriades, to please address the audience with Cyprus position, possible statistics of Cyprus flagged vessels, and what you believe could be done more from a collective action, especially since my philosophy is if we work together, we can achieve great results.
Well,
Vassilios.
many thanks, Yvonne, and good afternoon to all our viewers. I would like to thank the Nautical Institute for today's initiative to host the webinar on tackling piracy. I would also like to thank previous speakers for addressing the global and the EU perspective and the experience of one of the largest operators. Piracy and armed robbery, unfortunately, still remains a major threat to international shipping and trade, and a grave concern to all seafarers who sail in piracy risk regions. Can I have the next slide, please? In today's intervention, I will try to briefly introduce the national legal framework of Cyprus against piracy and other unlawful acts and its effectiveness, and address the issues that the global shipping community is facing with regard to piracy off the coast of Somalia and in the Gulf of Guinea. Next slide, please. In a snapshot, we see the resurrection of piracy in the early years of the 21st century, mainly all cases off the coast of Somalia. In Cyprus, we first looked at our existing national laws and how we could use them to tackle piracy. But soon we realized that we needed a comprehensive new law, not only to address the issue of piracy, but also to provide for the authorization of protection security companies and for allowing armed guards on board Cyprus flag vessels. Next slide, please. Cyprus was one of the first countries worldwide that introduced a comprehensive law on piracy. The level of comprehensiveness is shown in this slide with a list of all aspects associated to unlawful acts that are addressed in our national legal framework. Next slide. Great emphasis was placed on definitions of unlawful acts and piracy by borrowing existing terms from our criminal code and the law of the sea, to which Cyprus is a signatory party since 1989. High-risk areas were defined, and the competent authority rests with the Shipping Deputy Ministry of the Republic of Cyprus. Next slide. This is the high-risk area of the coast of Somalia, East Africa and Northwest Indian Ocean, as defined in the first schedule of our law. And the next slide. Similarly, in the west coast of Africa and the Gulf of Guinea. Next slide. Our law provides for both the master and the ship's operator to take security measures in accordance with SOLAS and the ISPS code, in addition to all the provisions prescribed in our circulars. Next slide. The ship's operator may entrust the implementation of some of the security and/or additional security measures to a private ship security company, and when the ship is within high-risk areas, the private ship security company is authorized to use firearms or specialized security equipment for the protection of the ship. Next slide. Any private ship security company will have to apply to the competent authority, and after the application is processed, then the private ship security company will be classified and authorized to provide security services on board Cyprus ships. A list of certified private ship security companies is available on the website of the Shipping Deputy Ministry. Next slide. As you can see, Cyprus has currently authorized 13 private ship security companies, and 224 Cyprus flag vessels used the services of these companies in 2019, whereas 165 Cyprus flag ships used similar services in 2020. Next slide. As indicated from the slide that we have on our screens, piracy incidents have not decreased in recent years. According to the International Maritime Bureau annual reports, 3, 1, and 5 security incidents occurred on Cyprus flagships in the last 3 years. None of them resulted to any loss of life. Next slide. Turning now on the global dimension of the issue, there are 2 major hotspots, the Somali coast and the Gulf of Guinea, where piracy incidents occur. However, piracy is a worldwide problem with attacks in Singapore and Malaga Straits also on the rise. The official government of Somalia and the neighboring countries joined the international effort to combat piracy with the combined Task Force 150 with a large number of naval assets present in the region. The presence of naval assets, of naval vessels in the region with reporting procedures and security measures taken by crew and the adoption by better management practices as proposed by the industry resulted to a 90% decline in attacks by 2013. However, the threat of piracy still exists and the area remains a high-risk area within high premium rates in insurance coverage. The overall majority of authorizations by the Shipping Deputy Ministry for the carriage of armed guards on board Cyprus flag vessels concern passengers within the high-risk area off the coast of Somalia. Next slide, please. Piracy in the Gulf of Guinea first appeared as robbery cases, stealing cargo or provisions from the ships, and later on developing into full piracy. Huge unemployment in the area results in illegal activities such as kidnapping. The majority of kidnapping of crew, approximately 95% worldwide, occurred in this region, stealing and refining oil and of course piracy. The protection of ships in this region, unlike the coast of Somalia, is entirely up to the capabilities of the navies of the coastal neighboring countries. Armed guards, as authorized by our law, are not allowed on board the ships for protection. Only armed persons in service of the armed forces or security forces of the coastal states, mainly in Nigeria, are allowed. Insurance costs increase due to attacks, and freight rates are more expensive as some ships avoid the region, reduces significantly the available number of ships to serve the area, which is key for both the imports and exports of most Central African countries. Next slide, please. IMO assisted into the development of the Djibouti Code in the area of the coast of Somalia concerning the repression of piracy and armed robbery against ships. The code enhanced the cooperation to the fullest possible extent in the repression of piracy against ships by all signatories in a manner consistent with international law. In 2015, a regional training center was established, which plays a key role in regional capacity building initiatives. There are also efforts to increase the use of AIS and LRIT, coastal radar, and other sensors and systems. Since its adoption, the code has become a basis for facilitating cooperation in the region. Next slide, please. The Code of Conduct concerning repression of piracy, armed robbery against ships, and illicit maritime activity in West and Central Africa, in the Gulf of Guinea region and West Africa, the Yaoundé Code was adopted in 2013 in 25 countries. Through capacity building activities, the organization aims to enhance maritime security worldwide with particular focus on developing countries. IMO oversees a security fund, region-specific fund for the Gulf of Guinea, and assists littoral countries in revising their national legislation to criminalize piracy and armed robbery, developing coordinated structure and procedures to combat piracy and armed robbery. However, most countries in the region do not allow international navies on their waters and do not allow the use of armed guards on board ships which enter their territorial sea. Countries like France, Spain, and Italy to maintain naval presence in international waters, but there is still no mandate for an international coordinated law enforcement operation in the Gulf of Guinea. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot from the website of IMB and a warning about the re-emergence of piracy off the coast of Somalia. It is quite evident that as long as poverty, unemployment, and lack of adequate government control in some regions still exist, and as long as the act of piracy is a lucrative business, piracy and armed robbery will continue to create problems in shipping worldwide. Cyprus, as a maritime nation, has invested interest in resolving the issue of piracy and armed robbery in the Gulf of Guinea to ensure safe transportation of goods and safety of life at sea, especially for our seafarers. Due to that, we continue to raise the issue in bilateral discussions both with other like-minded member states, especially within the EU. In the last few weeks, I had the opportunity to address the issue to both the Secretary General of IMO, Kita Klim, and to the EU Transport Commissioner Adina Valian, calling for a coordinated action. Cyprus is also grateful to those countries that continue to provide naval presence in affected areas, but at the same time, we are deeply concerned about the escalation of piracy acts in the Gulf of Guinea. Piracy is a multifaceted problem and requires a response at different levels in the framework of different international bodies, the EU, national governments, and requires a collective response. Perhaps the solution will be a hybrid model where efforts to counter unemployment in parallel with efforts to combat and deter piracy and armed robbery at sea by naval presence could be pursued. Next slide. Piracy is a persisting concern, and tackling the problem should become a priority of the global community. In this respect, Cyprus will continue to actively support all initiatives and actions undertaken in the context of the United Nations, including IMO and ILO, and the European Union for the development of a comprehensive solution aiming to ensure and maintain the safety and security of the ships and their personnel, and to combat piracy and related crimes in the region of Western Africa and the Gulf of Guinea. In conclusion, I would like to underline that Cyprus is strongly determined to work constructively with the industry and all the relevant stakeholders to explore ways to tackle the issue in an effective way. We are in the process of formulating a long-term strategy for Cyprus shipping, and my intention is to address the critical issue of piracy in our strategy. Towards this direction, and in the framework of our public consultation, you are welcome to share with us your views and proposals in order to further explore how to combat piracy both in any global and regional framework. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Deputy Minister, thank you very, very much for the presentation. We do have a question for you from Mr. Damien Vickers. And he says, Minister, please, in your presentation, you said that 51% of incidents took place in Nigerian waters. Does that mean that at least a substantial number of remaining attacks happen in international waters where stronger international intervention is possible?
Well, I don't let me check my slides, but I'm not challenging Damien for that. Well, indeed, if incidents are happening in international waters where intervention is possible, this is a sign for a more coordinated collective approach with all different actors involved. And this is, of course, the reason why we believe that we should strive our efforts and we should mobilize all our resources in order to tackle the problem. And it is for that reason that I invited Commissioner Valiant a month ago to examine and explore the way for a coordinated approach towards IMO to see how we can best tackle piracy. And last week in my meeting with Kidaklim, I also raised the issue. It seems that, as also John mentioned in his intervention, indeed, this is the right time to explore, to mobilize our resources and to work together in order to tackle the issue on the spot, but also see whether there is room to further improve our legislative framework. And the message from us, from Cyprus, is that we always know that this is a persisting concern. The problem is how, like now we have on top of our agenda issues like decarbonization, issues about the vaccination of seafarers. We should not, keep aside the piracy. If we do care about our operators, our seafarers, this is a concern that we should put it in the forefront and try to sort the issue. So the message is that we should join forces in order to seek an effective way of approaching the issue in all the different UN bodies. And Cyprus is at the disposal. I mentioned that to Commissioner Valiant and also to Kidaklim to further explore and seek solutions. But in the meantime, since we are formulating our strategy, we are open to ideas and how best, as a contracted party to IMO, as an EU member state, as a country that we have introduced a comprehensive law to tackle piracy, we are open to suggestions, discussions, in order to further explore the issue in an effective way.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I do have one question myself. Have Cyprus, ECSA, ICS collectively discussed with operators such as Mr. Prabhat to identify the areas where they can improve security, safety of seafarers? Are regulators listening to the actual operators? Mr. Prabhat, do you feel that this is the case?
Yes, I believe there is a very good dialogue and communication between all the stakeholders. And, we are being presented at all the industry bodies, right from ICS, BIMCO, and of course, CSC and the Cyprus has been quite voicing a big concern on the piracy issues and everything else. So I believe that, yes, the stakeholders outside Africa are quite well aligned. But we need to find a coordinated action with the stakeholders in West Africa so that then these actions can give positive results.
Thank you, Mr. Prabhat. Martin or John, do you, or actually the Deputy Minister, do you actually have anything to add on to that?
Well, I agree, and as ECSA, we have a very good dialogue with the European Commission, with the different services, and I refer to Somalia and the fact that there was a learning curve there, and I think those experiences form the basis of what is being done now, so we can build on that. The issue now, I think the most important thing is that there will be more naval assets sent to the region by EU member states, and we are pushing for that, because there was a reference to the use of Citadel by the crew. That's of course a very important measure, but that requires that there is indeed quick follow-up, that there can be assistance for the crew in that citadel very quickly, because the kidnappers know where to go to capture the crew, because that's the money, of course, that's the business model. So we need to have sufficient assets in the region. I think that's for at European level what we try to lobby for, to urge member states to do their utmost. I realize there are more problems in the world, and that the capacity is perhaps limited due to all the budget cuts over the last years, but this is an urgent topic we need to address as good as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I have a message from John, who unfortunately has another commitment. He did leave the meeting, and he has said thank you to all of you for involving ICS as well. And on that note, I hand over to our Deputy Minister, who would like to comment to the previous question that I raised.
Yes, Yvonne, I would like to echo both Prabhat and Martin in the sense that we do exchange a lot, and we do hear the concerns of our operators, of our seafarers, and we are always trying to respond. But one message that is perhaps important, and it's a shared responsibility by all of us, is how we could communicate the problem of piracy to the to outside the global shipping community, or outside the global community. For example, when it comes to Brussels, it's important also to highlight the issue and signal the importance to the European Parliament or to the European Commission, and not only to the shipping people, because this is, as we've seen from all the presentations today, none of the UN bodies or the EU bodies could solve the problem on its own. We need a holistic approach and a collective approach. In order to do that, we need to communicate the problem to outside the global, outside the shipping world, let's say. So it's important to mobilize the European Parliament, which is also the most influential body in Brussels, and all the other national governments. It's also our responsibility in Cyprus also to mobilize all the other entities, but also globally. So we do have, as let's say, maritime people, a shared responsibility to communicate the problem outside the shipping perspective. And I believe this is the role also, discussing also with Kita Klim, is something that we should do in order to seek solutions beyond the normal shipping fora.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. We do have participants still viewing, which is great for us. I would like to mention now, maybe a short summary. Having heard each of our distinguished speakers, and despite the increased pirate activity, the Gulf of Guinea appears to remain the most dangerous maritime zone, having over 40% of all pirate attacks and attempted attacks occur in the waters of West Africa, and continue to be more violent than other regions, where nearly all crew abductions recorded globally occur in the Greater Gulf of Guinea. At least 130 crew members taken hostage by West African pirates in 2020, nearly double from just 2 short years earlier. And seafarer kidnappings do not appear to be slowing down this year. Our key workers continue to experience long overdue repatriation. They are fatigued, mentally and physically stressed, and certainly one cannot imagine experiencing a piracy incident on top of that. To de-escalate piracy, After listening to the speakers, collective international cooperation on the matter and harmonisation of maritime laws is essential, as well as creating further awareness outside of the global shipping bubble. Coastal states to work in close partnership with each other, the IMO and other maritime bodies, sharing of essential information which can only increase law enforcement capabilities, without which perhaps piracy will continue to thrive and, God forbid, turn areas such as the Gulf of Guinea into no-go sailing zones. The expression I've heard many times is working together, we can achieve great results. And in closing, a couple of comments I would like to make. Sincere thanks to each of you for your valuable time in sharing your insights, views, actions. I thank all of the participants for listening to this captivating webinar. I also give special thanks to Alexandros Josephidis for his support and Nautical Institute Cyprus Branch Committee. In closing, our thoughts and prayers always, of course, especially from my side, turn to key workers, the seafarer, for better days to come, priority vaccination campaign, and governments, industry stakeholders to understand and accommodate urgent seafarer and industry needs. I wish everybody to stay safe and stay well. And again, huge thanks to each of you for the valuable time and the input. A round of applause for you.
Thank you.
And that brings our meeting, our webinar meeting, to an end. Hopefully, next time we see each other, we'll be in person. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.